Vancouver poet Christopher Levenson will now read the poem August 6, 1950 by Hibakusha Toge. Christopher is the author of 12 books of poetry, most recently A Tattered Coat Upon a Stick, published by Quattro in 2017. With Rob Taylor, he helped revive and run the popular Dead Poets reading series in Vancouver.
August 6th, 1950, by Sankichi Toge, translated by Richard Minner. They come running from that side, from this, hands on holstered pistols. The police come on the run. August 6th, 1950. The peace ceremony has been banned. On street corners at night, on bridge approaches at dawn, the police standing guard are restive. Today, at the very center of the city of Hiroshima, the Hachibori intersection, in the shadow of the F department store, the stream of city folk who have come to place flowers at memorials, at ruins, suddenly becomes a whirlpool. Chin straps, taut with sweat, plunge into the crowd. Split by the black battle line, reeling, the crowd as one looks up at the department store from 5th floor windows, 6th floor windows, fluttering against the backdrop of summer clouds, now in shadow, now in sunlight. Countless handbills dance and scatter slowly over upturned faces, into outstretched hands, into the depths of empty hearts. People pick them up off the ground, arms swing and knock them out of the air, hands grab them in midair, eyes read them. Workers, merchants, students, girls, old people and children from outlying villages, a throng of residents representing all of Hiroshima, for whom August 6th is the anniversary of a death. And the police, pushing, shoving, angry cries, the urgent appeal of the peace handbills they reach for, the anti-war handbills they will not be denied. Streetcars stop, traffic lights topple, jeeps roll up, fire sirens scream, riot trucks drive up, 2 trucks, 3. An expensive foreign car forces its way through the ranks of police in plain clothes. The entrance to the department store becomes a grim checkpoint. But still, handbills fall, gently, gently. Handbills catch on the canopy, hands appear holding a broom, sweep every last one off. They dance their way down one by one, like living things, like voiceless shouts, lightly, lightly. The peace ceremony, the releasing of doves, the ringing of bells, the mayor's peace message carried off on the breeze is stamped out like a child's sparkler. All gatherings are banned, speeches, concerts, the UNESCO meeting. Hiroshima is under occupation by armed police and police in mufti. The smoke of rocket launchers rises from newsreel screens. From back streets resound the shouts of those children too who signed petitions against the bomb. In the sky over Hiroshima on August 6, 1950, spreading light above anxious residents, casting shadows on silent graveyards, toward you who love peace, toward me who wants peace, drawing the police on the double. Handbills fall, handbills fall.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christopher. Our next guest, I have the honor of introducing, is a personal friend of mine. Her name is Sachi Rummel. Sachi is an 8-year-old girl experienced something that no child should ever have to experience. Sachi is a local Vancouver resident, an author, and now speaking for the rest of her life. She's doing as many speaking engagements as she can to try and bring her message of world peace and anti-nuclear message. Ladies and gentlemen, Sachi Rummel.
My name is Sachi. Sachi means happiness in Japanese. When the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, I was 8 years old and playing at my schoolyard only 3.5 kilometers away from ground zero. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, followed by a tremendous blast. In an instant, my life had changed forever. The heat of the blast was 4,000 degrees Celsius, and Hiroshima city was demolished in a second. Instantly, 80,000 people lost their lives. I was not instantly injured. Instantly, 80,000 lost their lives. I was not injured, but my father died 10 days after the bomb. My aunt vanished in the blast, and my cousin became an orphan because his father was off in the war. I lost many relatives. I kept silent for many years about my experience because it is very painful to remember this tragedy, like an oyster with a painful grain of sand. I kept it tightly wrapped inside of me, and gradually, as years went by, it didn't hurt so much. I moved on with my life and covered over the bad memories with many good memories. I met my husband, Charles Rummel, and we were married in 1945. Sorry, I'm 1965. I was a hibakusha. I was told that I might never have children, but we are lucky to have two beautiful daughters and now two lovely granddaughters. I have been living in Canada for more than 40 years. The beauty of Canadian nature has been healing my horrific tragedy little by little. When the nuclear tragedy took place in Fukushima in 2011, I decided it was time to open my mind and share my survival story. In an oyster, over time, that tightly wrapped grain of sand became a pearl. So this is how I think of my experience, a pearl of wisdom to share with the world about the evils of nuclear war and radiation. We should try hard to make our world a peaceful one, full of happiness. The rest of my life, I will tell my story, especially to young adults who will be the ones making decisions for the world of the future. This is what happened. Now, I am reading some passages from my Hiroshima book. The day the earth stood still. The 6th of August, 1945 was a hot, fine summer day. A beautifully cleared, cloudless blue sky spread before us as far as the eye could see. My family of 7 was living together happily. Unknown to us at this time, early in the morning, the American B-29 bomber Enola Gay was carrying Little Boy, the world's first atomic bomb, toward Hiroshima city. Enola Gay was named after the mother of the captain on board the B-29, Colonel Tibbets. The citizens of Hiroshima were beginning their daily tasks. Some were eating breakfast. Children were on their way to school, and I was in the school play yard with my classmates. The school playground was about 3.5 kilometers from the ground zero. As an 8-year-old child, I didn't understand the stark fear of war. I recall people around me talking about the misery that dropped bombs had caused. But even now, I remember the instant the atomic bomb dropped. The playground was located on top of a small hill. In the school grounds, there was a large tree. I'm sure that the reason I was not injured was because I was in the shade of that tree. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, instantly followed by a blast that created a sandstorm. At first, I couldn't see anything. We were terrified. What had happened? We started running toward the classroom. Our teacher told us to sit down in chairs and to be quiet. It took a while to calm down and stop crying. The teacher divided us into small groups to go home, following the senior grade group leader. We went home down the mountain by holding hands in pairs. Black rain. Along the way back home from school, even though the sky was perfectly clear, a black rain began to fall. My friend Fujita and I somehow became separated from the group. We ducked into an air raid shelter to get cover from the rain. Black rain continued for 40 minutes with thunder and sometimes large drops of black rain or drizzle. We decided to carry on and descended the mountain anxiously. I didn't know how we made it home. The black rain had dirtied the white blouse I wore that day. The stain never came out, even after washing it several times. I really liked that white blouse. Fortunately, my house in Takas wasn't burned, but the blast had caused the straw tatami mats to buckle. The house was tilted. Glass doors were shattered, and some of the roof tiles had blown off, as there was a well and water pump in the yard. There was no concern about lack of water. Even though the house was damaged, it still kept out the rain and wind. Out in the garden that evening, my grandma filled a wash basin up to my waist with lukewarm water from the pump. I could see the eastern sky painted a mad red. That's the town of Hiroshima burning, hey? It's terrible. It looks like a big bomb has fallen. It's scary. That was the explanation that I received. Ghosts. As the day was coming to an end, the victims of the burned city were being evacuated to the less damaged west side of the city, which was supposed to be safe and had lots of clear water with space of those wounded victims. Their burned clothes were raggedly hanging from their bodies. Their peeled skin was hanging from their hands. Their hair was sticking up in the air or messy. No one could recognize who was who. They were swaying left and right, weeping, crying, and mourning. The ghost-like figures trudged along with burnt rags as clothing, their bodies swollen with burns. As I watched someone walking, they slowly fell down dead. Our neighbors were coming to our house to get water from the pump, which was the only water in our neighborhood. They were talking about hushed voices. I was kept inside the house while my grandma prayed, Namu Amida Butsu, a Buddhist prayer. The next door neighbor, Mr. Sato, came home. So now we had a little hope that my father and my aunt Chieko would return soon. The eastern part of Hiroshima burned constantly, and the sky above it was blood red. We could see it from our garden now, since most of the buildings and trees were destroyed and nothing was left to block our view. Bedtime for children had passed a long time ago, but my cousin Yoshi and I couldn't sleep at all, since we are told not to leave the house. We continued with games in the playroom. It was until after midnight that my father came home. Is everyone all right? Mother heard him shouting and ran towards his voice. She found him collapsed in the doorway. He wasn't moving. Sweeping up the scattered glass throughout the bedroom, Mother found the most even surface she could, laid out a futon, and dragged Father's immobile body and put him in bed. Your father was heavy. It was brute strength that allowed me to move him that day. She told me later, I think I did pretty well on my way. My mom was about the size of an 11-year-old Westerner. Over the next few days, my father, bedridden, continued to mourn and suffer from diarrhea, nausea, and the pain from his injuries. Burned by radiation from outside, his internal organs are affected as well. He couldn't consume solid food. He only survived on water and thinned rice congee. My mother borrowed a wagon from a farmer and spread a straw mat on it and placed Dad on the wagon. She pushed him to a school in hope of finding a doctor. My father was so ill. He was poisoned by the radiation. Day by day, he lost his energy. He couldn't get out of his bed. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered. The emperor made a public broadcast announcing that the war was over. When Dad heard the emperor's announcement, he said, "What a good day! How wonderful! From now on, we'll have a peaceful future." Taka's Park, August 16, 1945, 10 days after the bomb exploded. Also, one day after Japan's unconditional surrender to United States of America, our family lost our father. It was a sunny, sweltering hot day again. In the 10 tatami room, there was the household Buddhist altar. My father's body was set in front of this altar, covered by a piece of white sheet, and his face was covered with a white cloth. The droning of cicadas seemed to make the hot summer day even hotter. The monk arrived. He began to read a sutra and prayer. The room was quiet except for his lower voice. The ladies of neighborhood gathered together and saved a cup of tea, paste of sweet potatoes, figs, and watermelons. The Taka's Park, many holes had been dug into which dead body could be placed and cremated. The size of each hole was just large enough for a body. In the hole, pieces of wood were lined up horizontally and evenly. After my father's funeral in my house, his body was carried by a farmer's carriage to Taka's Park. His body was placed on top of a futon and covered with a new white sheet. I watched 4 workers with bandana around their heads lower my father's body into the hole. My family and some neighbors were standing a short distance from the hole, staring at it. At the final service, the monk read a short sutra and prayer. Then a workman piled some twigs on top of my father's body and poured gasoline from a bottle onto it. Suddenly, the flames flew high up the air. No, no, don't burn my father. I dashed toward him, but was caught by someone and brought back to my mother. Everyone started sobbing. The fire consuming my father's body burned quickly. Flames from other graves burned around us. The entire park was turned to a funeral pyre. The smell of stinky dead bodies were awful. You could hardly breathe. But no one complained. I felt like vomiting. I glanced at my cousin Yoshi. He was standing still, watching the fire.
Thank you. Thank you very, very, very much, Sachi. That was a very powerful and poignant reading and very brave. Thank you so much. Now, Vancouver Peace Poppies co-founder Teresa Gagné is the creative vision between tonight's presentation. She first met local Kushi Kinuko Lasky in 1989 while helping with a Lanterns for Peace ceremony organized by Canadian Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. They remained friends until Kinuko's death in 2004, working together on many A-bomb commemoration events. In 2016, while planning the inaugural Let Peace Be Their Memorial ceremony, Teresa found Sachi's story on the website of the Nike Place Japanese Canadian Heritage Center and invited her to lay a wreath for A-bomb victims. Sachi agreed, and another wonderful relationship began. The personal warmth of these two hibakusha and their willingness to share their powerful stories in the cause of peace has been a joy and inspiration to Teresa over the years. Teresa will now read the poem Snowfalls and then introduce a video about Kanuko's journey from A-bomb survivor to peace activist.
Snow falls. Snow falls on this country of sorrow. Snow falls as though to say, feed on your sorrow. Snow falls on loss and devastation, on mountains and rivers, on people with shabby clothes, on orphans with disheveled hair. Snow falls as louder the encircling seas moan. Snow falls, day and night, like a long and plaintive dirge, as though to say, calm the sobbing of your heart, enclose yourself in sorrow. Like the birds in their nests, and foxes in holes, bear the winter cold as do strong leaves of grass rooted in the earth. Snow falls as though to say, revive, good spring, from under the snow. Quietly, so quietly from the infinitely deep sky, snow falls. Ah, with what merciless mercy, snow falls on this country of sorrow. And now, before the slideshow starts, I'd like to say a few words about my friend, Kanuko Lasky. Kanuko was an amazing spirit. Severely injured after the atomic bombings in Hiroshima when she was only 16, she lost the sight in one eye, endured painful reconstructive surgeries, and faced hurtful but understandable discriminations by those who feared that radiation sickness was contagious, or that women hibakusha would be barren or give birth to deformed children. Nobody knew. At times, in her youth, things were so bad that she attempted suicide, but in the end, her strong spirit and will to live prevailed. The Kanuko I knew was a bright and lively person, creative and artistic, and with a warm and loving nature. After 37 years of keeping silent about her experiences, she, like Sachi, decided that she needed to push beyond her personal comfort and share her story with the world. She saw the nuclear weapons arsenal growing and heard the war drums beating and decided that people needed to hear her story. In 1992, she gave her first public interview, and from then until her death in 2004, she was a tireless speaker and crusader for peace and nuclear disarmament. She spoke to church groups, to universities and politicians, and in 1984, testified before a US congressional committee chaired by Senator Ted Kennedy. But speaking to children and youth was her true vocation, and over the years, she must have spoken to thousands of children of all ages. She shared with them her personal tragedy and made real for them the horror that comes in the aftermath of atomic bombs. But she left them filled with hope and the confidence that she believed that they could build a future where such weapons would never be used again. After her sudden death, her husband Dave, who also appears in the videos, continued her work until age forced him to stop. This video was compiled after her death and combines footage from several different interviews she gave over the years. Here on Spirit Tonight and on tape is Kanuko Lasky speaking her piece.
Welcome to Hiroshima, Japan. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my experience on August 6, 1945. I was a student, mobilized student at the time, and I was working in a communication hospital in Hiroshima.
That day is burned forever into her memory.
This is the first interview. This is the first TV interview back in 1982.
And I just took time to walk to the hospital. I look up in the sky and I saw that the white thin trail behind the B-29. And the next second, I was surrounded with brilliant orange light. It's orange light all over.
She lost her father in the blast, literally melted in the basement of their home.
Well, this is a hypocenter here. And then my home is here. I walked down this street and I was here, down here. Hospital was right there.
Although she was less than a mile from the center of the blast, Kanuko survived because she was protected by the heavy concrete walls of the hospital where she worked, but she was seriously injured. Years of plastic surgery have disguised the physical scars, but there are still bouts of radiation sickness and the horror of that day.
Everything upside down, and people dying and blood all over, but nobody screaming or anything. It's just silent. Everybody moving in the silent. And then I went out in the front entrance. I saw the people coming towards to the hospital. They had a long face and long arm and all black and no hair, no clothes, it's just black, like a over burnt toast. Here the people's faces burnt, skins hanging from chin, made it look long, and hanging from arm, and the hands was long, like this, the skin is hanging.
Kanuko Lasky was married to a Canadian and moved here after the war. She is blind in one eye and has lived with tumors, miscarriages, blood disorders, and facial scars since that day.
At the backyard, we had a big pool. In case of fire, we always had waters in a pool. Then, all of a sudden, all at once, fire started all over. Orange flame reached to cover the sky, cover the earth. Everybody jumping into the pool, one after other. And time I got there, bottom people was drowning, top people trying to get in. And I was so hot, I wanted to get some water, but I didn't see any space to put my hands into unless I push few heads down. I could never forget that agony in their faces. All the people are drowning in a pool.
When you look out the window at the Vancouver skyline, do you see the Hiroshima skyline?
Yes, I do. It's a beautiful blue sky and sunny morning. I can't help myself thinking what's happened to if bomb was dropped now. I only think I still live here today because it's God's will. And now it's my principle, responsibility to tell other people, warning.
Because you know you went through it.
So that's I want to do. I die now.
After I started helping Kanuko, well, I've been working with Kanuko all my life, since 1951. And I felt that my main aim was to protect Kanuko. I mean, she was traumatized. I wanted to help her in every way I could. So all through my life, when we first came to Canada to make a home, to make a living, my main interest was protecting Kanuko. And when she started going public, I was quite worried because she may get hurt, and I tried to stay by her side and direct her in any way I could. I would never ever try to correct her English or change her story, but I helped her all I could. And when she passed away, I thought, well, I must keep on going and keep her message of nuclear disarmament and peace. It's been 18 months since Kanuko passed away, and it seems like yesterday, and I shall always miss her. I shall always miss her. But she's up there smiling down on our efforts for peace, and I hope we're successful.
And now Mackenzie Gray will introduce the next section of our program.
In Japan and other countries where Buddhism is practiced, there is a traditional ceremony called Obon, where floating candlelit paper lanterns or soul boats are released in memory of loved ones who have died. In the chaotic aftermath of the Hiroshima bombing, victims flocked to the city's 7 rivers in search of the cooling release of water, and many died there. In the following years, the thousands of atomic bomb victims were especially associated with this tradition, and lantern ceremonies were adapted as a way to both commemorate the bomb victims and call for an end to war. August Lanterns for Peace ceremonies are now held in many countries around the world. In the darkness, the tiny candle flames are an eloquent symbol of vulnerability and hope. Slides and video footage from lantern ceremonies held in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Seattle, Vancouver, and Burnaby will provide a backdrop to readings of 5 powerful and thought-provoking poems written by Hibakusha. Together, they represent both the terrible personal losses and our collective determination to change the world for the better.
Before starting the show of the poetry reading and lanterns, I'd like to recognize our diverse and talented poetry readers tonight. Our first poetry reader, Charles Rummel, was born in Canada and moved to Japan in 1959 as a 19-year-old exchange student. He stayed for 16 years, gaining degrees in economics and sociology from Tokyo University and later working in Japanese TV and finance. He met his future wife, Sachi Komura, and they were married in 1965. His early introduction to Japan led to a lifelong love of the people, their culture, and language. He will read our first poem in Japanese and in English. Well-known local actor Mackenzie Gray will be reading the second poem in this section. In addition to acting, Mackenzie is a director, writer, composer, and producer. He has appeared in over 250 films, TV shows, and plays, and has been nominated for and won many awards for his work. Our third reader, Satoko Oka Norimatsu, is a writer based in Vancouver, BC, and founder of the Peace Philosophy Center. She's co-author of Resistant Islands, Okinawa Confronts Japan and the United States. Satoko has acted as a translator for atomic bomb survivors, including Nakazawa Kenji, the author of Barefoot Gen. For the past 15 years, she has led study groups to Hiroshima and Nagasaki in conjunction with the American University of Washington, D.C. The final poem in this section will be read by local poet Christopher Levenson, who also read the poem which opened our presentation tonight. Thanks to all these wonderful poets, and now I'll start the slideshow.
返せ、私を返せ、私につながる人間を返せ、人間の用のある限り、崩れぬ平和を返せ。Give back my father. Give back my mother. Give grandpa back, grandma back. Give me my sons and daughters back. Give me back myself. Give back the human race. As long as this life lasts, this life, give back peace that will never end. Like the first poem this evening, this poem was written by Toge Sankichi. He served as the preface of the poetry book of the atomic bomb. And this book was sent in 1951 to the World Youth Peace Festival in Berlin as one of Japan's representative works and gained international acclaim.
Mitsue Kubo, born in 1929, was a 16-year-old high school student conscripted to work in the Norimatsu munitions factory only 1.5 kilometers from the epicenter of the Nagasaki A-bomb explosion. In 1984, she self-published memoirs of her A-bomb experiences. She later collected accounts from other hibakusha and combined them with her own in the book Hibaku, published in Japanese in 1987 and in English in 1990. This poem is untitled, From the Epitaph in My Heart, by Mitsu Kubo, part 1 of the book Hibaki, Recollections of A-Bomb Survivors. Her steps are weak, but strong are the mother's arms holding her dead little baby. What are they seeking, these trudging people? Processions of red, burnt bodies, all in a line, go on through the grass and along the paths. With mouths shut, heads sagging, the processions go on. Their hollow hearts feel no more sorrow, no more pain. No trace of spirit left in their vacant eyes, no tears left to shed. They are just following the people ahead, with feeble steps, not caring where they lead. Water, 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 please. Water, water, water. People begging from the roadside, shaking, worn out, hands extended, opening the slits of eyes hidden beneath burnt, swollen lids. For the people begging for water, for the people who have lost their souls, for the people with burnt skin hanging, at least for their last hours. Oh, clouds, please, cover the glaring sun. Oh, sun, if you have mercy, please soften your brilliance. Too harsh are your rays on their burnt bodies. What are these cruel tortures for? Are these not innocent people, free of blame? Out of death I am walking. Out of death I am running and pushing through, holding on to the hope of life.
Sadako Kurihara, who was born in 1913, was a Japanese poet, writer, and peace activist who survived the Hiroshima bombing. Her literary talent flourished from an early age, and even during the war, Kurihara was engaged in creating democratic and anti-war literature with her anarchist husband. The poem, Let Us Be Midwives, written in 1946, was inspired by a true story of a woman who gave birth on August 8, 1945, in the ruins of the Hiroshima A-bomb. Let Us Be Midwives, untold story of the atomic bomb. It was night in the basement of a building now in ruins. Victims of the atomic bomb, jammed in a dark room. There wasn't even a single candle. The smell of fresh blood, the stench of death, the sickening smell of humanity, the moans. Out of all that, miraculously, a voice. The baby is coming. In this hellish basement, at this very moment, a young woman had gone into labor. In the dark, without a single match, what to do? Forgetting their own pains, people worried about her. And then, I'm a midwife, I'll help with the birth. Seriously injured herself, the speaker had been moaning only moments before. And so, in the darkness of the hellish depths, new life was born. And so, before dawn, still bathed in blood, the midwife died. Let us be midwives. Let us be midwives, even at the cost of our own lives. This next poem was written much later in 1971. Kurihara was heavily involved with not just anti-nuclear movements, but also movements against Vietnam War and the US military bases in Japan. Kurihara was also very conscious of the Imperial Japan's atrocities against the other Asian nations and believed that reconciliation could only be achieved by Japan acting on its anti-war commitment in a new constitution and by Japanese people squarely facing their responsibility for the aggressive war. This poem carries such sentiment. When we say Hiroshima, do people answer gently, "Ah, Hiroshima"? Say Hiroshima and hear Pearl Harbor. Say Hiroshima and hear rape of Nanking. Say Hiroshima and hear of women and children in Manila thrown into trenches, doused with gasoline and burned alive. Say Hiroshima and hear echoes of blood and fire. Say Hiroshima and we won't hear gently, "Ah, Hiroshima." In chorus, Asia's dead and her voiceless masses spit out the anger of all those we made victims, that we may say Hiroshima, and hear in reply gently, "Ah, Hiroshima." We must in fact lay down the arms we were supposed to lay down. We must get rid of all foreign bases. Until that day, Hiroshima will be a city of cruelty and bitter bad faith, and we will be pariahs burning with remnant radioactivity. That we may say Hiroshima, and hear in reply gently, "Ah, Hiroshima, we first must wash the blood off our own hands."
Everlasting Green by Tamiki Hara. Here in this delta called Hiroshima, let young leaves grow lush and overflow. Fill memories of death and hellfire with fresh prayers. Everlasting green, undying green. From this delta, Hiroshima, may fresh leaves spill over. Born in Hiroshima in 1905, Tamiki Hara was at his parents' home only 1.5 kilometers from the blast. After 2 nights in the open, Hara and his surviving relatives fled to villages west of Hiroshima. Hara returned to Tokyo, where he recorded his experiences in poetry and prose. His best-known work, Summer Flowers, was published in 1949. He died by suicide on March 13th, 1951. After the Hiroshima bombing, it was said that no grass or trees would grow there for 75 years. Yet the following spring, new shoots were seen emerging from seemingly dead trees, less than half a kilometer from the epicenter. These trees and their seeds became a symbol of hope and renewal. On the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima is again a rich green city, and seeds and saplings from A-bombed trees are growing in more than 30 countries worldwide, symbolizing the double message of caution and hope that unique survivor trees of Hiroshima and Nagasaki represent.
Wow, thank you. Thank you very, very much to all our poets and chilling readings that they've made tonight. So far this evening, we've heard the live and the recorded testimonials of 2 hibakusha telling their own stories. But today, only % of the hibakusha are alive, and it's important that their accounts don't die with them. Well, to keep their stories alive, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have been recruiting scores of volunteers to train as denshosha, or legacy successors, who take on the job of recounting the lived experiences of aged Hibakusha. And tonight, we're honored to have with us a woman who has assumed that role within her own personal extended family. Ellen Hayakawa is a lifelong eco-spiritualist activist for the environment and for peace, and co-author of the best-selling book, Healing the Heart of the World, Harnessing the Power of Intention to Change Your Planet and Your Life. A third-generation Canadian of Japanese ancestry, her parents and grandparents were wrongfully dispossessed and incarcerated in prison camps in BC during the World War II. And at the same time, her grandfather's brother, Minakishi, and his wife, Sumi, were loyal Japanese citizens living in Hiroshima. Ellen says, my ancestors have asked me to tell their story of the day the bomb dropped, so that by uniting inner peace with outer action, we make sure that it never happens again. Through Ellen, we will experience the story of her great aunt Sumi, whose husband was only 500 meters from the hypercenter of the bomb. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you so much, Brent. And thanks to each and every one of you for taking the time to come here tonight. So this is the story of my great aunt Sumiya and about the day the bomb fell on Hiroshima. The people of Hiroshima had been warned about the impending danger of a bombing by American planes. So I prepared my family for danger. I'd sent Yoshihiro, my son, who was 8 years old, to stay with my parents in a farming area away from Hiroshima City. I had a satchel with money and a few belongings in it ready by the door in case a bomb fell. On the morning of August 6th at 8:15 a.m., I just finished hanging the clothes out on the line. Yesko, my 5-year-old daughter, was playing in the dirt in front of the house. Suddenly, there was a flash of light and an explosion, and the earth shook. A massive white plume appeared in the sky. White clouds covered the entire area. My first thought was of Yesko, who was lying on the ground in the yard. I wanted to protect her and immediately fell on top of her, covering her with my body. When the cloud cleared, I put her on my back. She was unconscious. I slipped into my house and washed her face. I grabbed a bucket that I'd always used to do my household chores and the satchel of belongings and money. I walked out and down the street, horrified. I saw my friends and neighbors walking like ghosts, already their skin falling off from the tips of their fingers. Some in their homes were sprawled out beneath the roofs of their houses, their bowels exposed, their flesh burning. I wanted to stop and help, but I had to think about Yesko and saving her life. I kept thinking about Yesko. I knew she'd inhaled the gases and was likely barely alive. I kept walking towards the river and wondered what had happened to Minikichi, my husband. He'd been feeling poorly for the last 4 days and had not gone to work. However, that morning, he decided to go to work and had left the house early. As I walked through the street, I saw people horribly burned, crying and looking for loved ones. I suddenly realized that I must have dropped my satchel of belongings and money. It was gone, and I was carrying the bucket. Why was I carrying this bucket? What use was it? How had I dropped the satchel? I threw the bucket away and continued to the river. The river was especially high. The banks were covered with people, dead and alive. I waded into the river, which was chest deep, to get to the other side. I finally reached the other side, and I rested on the sandy beach. I didn't drink any water. I saw many soldiers asking for water, and we had been told if they did drink, death was inevitable. People told the soldiers, "Do not drink water or you'll die." And they replied, "We don't care. It's better to die." As I walked, I saw the soldiers were gathering already many hundreds of dead and throwing them into a pile of other human bodies and burning them. I continued to walk through the city, thinking only of Yasko and myself and wondering where my husband was. There were so many people walking in the streets. Suddenly, in the distance, I saw a man who had a white hat that was partially burned off. The top part of his body was all exposed as his clothing had been burned off. His face was totally burned and bleeding, and his lower lip protruded. That looked like the white hat that Minikichi had worn that morning. I asked myself, could that be Minikichi? Could it be him? When we got closer, I was overjoyed when I realized that it really was him. He was alive. I stopped and cleaned his wounds as best as I could. He was very weak, unsteady on his feet, and ready to collapse. I held him up. He clung to me, and I even more slowly continued on. I kept wondering whether Yasko was dead because she was still limp on my back. Most of the day had gone by. I was so tired and thirsty and hungry, and I had nothing to eat. I had to get to my family's farm. We just kept walking on the road that led to my family's farm. And then I saw an army truck, and I asked the soldiers, please, please, could my family and I have a ride? Already, it was full of people, but we were able to get on. I'm not sure exactly when we reached my parents' home, but we did reach it. After the bomb, it was very difficult as it was hard to find things to eat, and we had to start our lives all over again. But the neighbors came, and they brought food, and they brought us some pans to cook. Minikichi had a high fever for 1 month, and I cared for him and Yasko. I believe it was land and sea vegetables that restored him and Yasko back to health. We also went to the desert where there was cactus for healing. We had more children over the next few years and stayed near my mother's farm for 16 years while I sewed kimonos. Although Minikichi was within 500 meters of the bomb and had radiation sickness and suffered with it for the rest of his life, he made drums and taught no theater. And then we moved back to Hiroshima City. I became a professional kimono maker. I've sewn for 43 years, and I'm still sewing at the age of 67. Minikichi lived into his 70s. I'd like to forget about the Hiroshima bombing, but many times I can visualize the large B-29 bomber and the clouds of atomic dust washing over us. And that's the end of Auntie Sumiya's story. And today, in honor of Auntie Sumiya and my grandfather's brother, my great uncle Minikichi, and other Hibakusha survivors like Kanuko Lasky and Sachi Rummel, I wear the kimono that Auntie Sumiya sewed for me when I was 9 years old, and that was carried from Hiroshima by my grandmother on her first visit to Japan since 1919, when she immigrated to Canada. I wear the kimono in honor of the hibakusha, who rose like phoenixes out of the ashes to go on and birth children, recreate beautiful lives and relationships, and continue to contribute to the arts and culture in spite of the suffering that they'd had. And I am committed to sharing my family's story so that we remember and so that our thoughts and actions move us towards global peace. So wars and nuclear bombing will never happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. That was indeed a very moving story. When I originally conceived this evening, I had planned it as an evening of written and spoken accounts of the bombing and their aftermath. But when I came across the powerful poem that ends this evening's presentation, I realized that art offers us yet another window into the Hibakusha experience. The 10 artworks you're about to see were generously made available to us by the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. The museum holds thousands of A-bomb drawings by survivors, which describe the artist's own experience of the bombings. Mostly collected in 1974, 1975, and 2002, these drawings and paintings are powerful records of the horrors endured by ordinary Hiroshima citizens and illustrate with brutal clarity the devastation that nuclear weapons still hold in store for human beings. The artist's ages are given at the time of the events depicted, and the accompanying texts on the slides are from their own testimony. Some were adults in 1945, but others were young children and adolescents. 30 to 60 years later, they courageously agreed to commit to paper the horror of what they saw and endured on the day that the world changed forever.
Before these grotesque figures, let me pause stand against the measure of these cruel scenes. May what I have done, will do, be tested. Page after page, their voices close in on me, darker than dark, picture after picture, my tears flowing freely, never stopping. In this book, I see so graphically the faces of close friends who fled, loved ones who died, even as shudders engulf my heart as the agony of these countless naked people I see beyond the flames. What is it? Fallen, staring fixedly at me. Can it be? My own eye. Ah, who could check the desire to straighten these twisted legs, to cover these naked loins, to free one by one these fingers clenched and bloody? Who can repress indignation, deep and growing, that an atomic flash was set off in the skies over my dying Japan, warning shot in a new war, that in an instant 200,000 Japanese lives were taken? Before these paintings, I pledge that I will act, that in the light of this history, the future will not be one that calls for repentance.
That finishes our program for tonight, and I want to thank all of you who have come to watch the program.